Have you ever walked into a store and within 30 seconds it's like, "Ugh, I'm ready to leave"? Now, nothing terrible happened. No one was rude to you. They did acknowledge you, but something didn't feel right. Have you ever thought about the time someone follows you too closely to see what you're doing in the store? Or maybe they launched into a sales presentation before you had a chance to even let them know what you were interested in, or if you were just browsing. Or they might have been that salesperson that came up and asked you three questions, bing, 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 in a row, and you didn't even get a chance to answer. And you felt like you were in an interrogation. You were trying to fine tune where you wanted to spend your money before you even understood if you wanted to spend money or if there was something there that interested you. So you chose to leave because you felt very uncomfortable. Somewhere, your brain decided that the experience and the interaction you were having felt more risky than the reward. This perspective of risks fascinates me as a salesperson, and it's something that most sales trainings completely miss, omit, and never discuss. Sales training often teaches that buyers are weighing cost against value. Well, sure, at some point you are. And the only questions in a buyer's head are, can I afford it? Is it worth it? Should I wait? Should I buy now or later? Those questions certainly matter at some point in time. However, I don't think those are the first questions that buyers want answered. There's another question that gets answered long before the buyer is even thinking about money. They're wondering, will I regret talking to this person? Think about that for a minute. How many of the people that you're approaching or that approach you in a sales situation are already wondering if they're going to regret talking with you? Every buyer runs what I call an internal risk audit before they start talking with someone, and you don't know what's on that audit list. It happens almost instantly. It's not with a spreadsheet or any logic. No AI is ever going to help you out of this. That internal risk audit is your human instincts on full alert. And I'll bet you all have been there also. So when your brain is quietly asking you, will I be pressured? Will I lose control of this conversation? Will I feel foolish if I ask a question? Will this conversation become uncomfortable? If the answer to any of those feels like a maybe, something happens to the buyer. They don't necessarily leave, but they do stop moving forward. You will lose the momentum in your sales conversation. Or their willingness to be open to new ideas diminishes. Suddenly, their answers will become shorter and more clipped. And it seems as if there's a conversation still happening, but they're not present. Psychologically, the buyer is walking towards the exit when all of that is happening. And this is not because the buyer might have fear, it's about prediction. Our brains are prediction machines. Long before we can analyze any facts, we predict outcomes. So every interaction that we're having is compared to thousands of those interactions from our previous experiences. This means the buyer isn't just listening to you, the salesperson. They're comparing you to every salesperson they've ever met. They're thinking of every pushy presentation they've had. They're thinking of every manipulative close they've experienced. They're thinking of every conversation in which they felt cornered. The buyers aren't just reacting to you, they're reacting to their history, to their memories of conversations. Now, here's the thought I would like you to review. Most sellers unconsciously increase the buyer's emotional risk without even intending to do so. It happens often. It happens when they explain too much, or answer questions that weren't asked, or they interrupt the buyer, or they rush towards solutions. Many also lose the buyer when they stack question after question without giving the buyer time to think about the question and to give a response. None of these behaviors seem serious individually, but when you look at your buyers, how many buying experiences have they had? So they've accumulated all of this history, and those thoughts and impressions are driving what they're doing, how they're going to respond, and their behavior. If they have an impression from the seller at any time at all that the seller is acting from an attitude of, I'm leading the conversation, you, the buyer, need to keep up, well, you can kiss everything goodbye. Once buyers feel they're losing control, they'll instinctively protect that control. You'll hear protection come from the buyer like, I need to think about it. Let me look around. I'm just gathering information. Those are safety places they go to. Those are not objections. A smart seller, when they hear those phrases, will go, oops, I went too far. I need to discover a way to back off, still remain connected, and see how I reinterest the buyer. It's a pretty heavy process. Maybe you just don't want to get to that problem in the first place. Buyers always want to restore their psychological distance. And if you go too far, there may be no retrieval. Here's where I think great conversationalists separate themselves from other salespeople. They don't try to reduce the financial risk first. They try to reduce the conversational risk. Think about that. Reduce the conversational risk. Instead of asking someone, can I tell you about our program? Can I tell you about our offer? They might ask, what would make this conversation worthwhile for you today? That's thoughtful. Notice what that one question does. It hands back control to the buyer. Or try this one on. What would you like to leave today's conversation knowing? You're not implying a sale. You give them safety. You're no longer steering them towards your agenda. You're inviting them to define their own destination. That's a completely different experience. Here's the irony. When buyers feel more in control, they're often more willing to explore that reason and need to change and then to buy. You don't feel pressured into telling them. Think about your closest friendships. You don't feel pressured into telling your friends more. You volunteer information because you trust they'll handle it well. Sales conversations work the same way. Trust isn't built because you're persuasive or because you have things in common. It grows because the buyer never feels the need to protect themselves. It's that simple. That's why I believe finesse in selling has very little to do with clever language or practiced objections. Trust has everything to do with lowering the invisible emotional cost for the buyer to stay in the conversation. Think of that. What is the buyer's invisible emotional cost to be in conversation with you? When you approach all your sales conversations from that perspective, you're going to have an opportunity to really see your sales explode. So before your buyer is ever interested in investing any money, they have to feel safe because you invested attention on them. They'll trust the seller's clarity and honesty when they feel less at risk to participate in a conversation with you. Only after the buyer is willing to take risks to be in a conversation with you does the money even have room for discussion. I have a new challenge for you this week. You're supposed to be assessing each sales conversation and to see what you did well and to determine what it is you could do better. But I want you to stop measuring, if you're doing this, I want you to stop measuring how much information you gave the buyer. And I'd like you to stop measuring how well you presented to your buyer. Instead, after each conversation, ask yourself just one question. Was I present for the buyer? And did I leave the buyer feeling more in control than when we started? Interesting, huh? Buyers don't simply purchase products, they choose conversations that make them feel comfortable, and then they can make good decisions. I'm Marla Koupal, the Sales Conversation Architect. Subscribe to the Sales Pulse podcast on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Until next time, build sales one clear, curious conversation at a time.